Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and I'm here today to do a Friday Reads where I wrap up the week in reading and talk about any bookish things. Today's going to be a very Friday Reads heavy recap of the week in reading because I finished 5 books this past week, and that is pretty landmark for me. It's big, it's huge, it's a lot. Admittedly, I had already almost finished one of those books in my last Friday Reads video that I posted. It'll be linked down below. But still, it's an accomplishment, and I am very proud of it. So we'll get to those. There's not much to cover before we get to the Friday Reads portion of the video. There hasn't been a whole lot of book news this week. Next week is going to be big because the Women's Prize will be announced on June 14th, and we'll see what happens. I am still rooting for Demon Copperhead, but I did really like Trespasses, and I have heard such really good things about Fire Rush and Black Butterflies that it feels like I would be very happy with either one of them ultimately winning. The only one that I didn't like was Marriage Portrait, and there are enough people out there who have liked it that it'll be fine if it does win. I'm not going to do a prediction video, but if you would like to tell me what your prediction is, I'd love to hear it in the comment section down below. I just think because I'm so emotionally invested in Demon Copperhead, that is still what I want. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen at all. But anyway, I'd love to hear what you think. It was announced this week that Morgan Talty, the author of Night of the Living Res, my beloved Night of the Living Res, will have a new book coming out in 2024. It's a novel. It would be called Fire, Exit. I was going to find the little marketplace article or like something about it that I could point to, and all I have is Morgan Talty's tweet with a screenshot of the marketplace announcement. So I guess the details aren't really out there yet. There's nothing for me to link to in any concrete way. So there was a small Maine or New England newspaper that requires a subscription to actually read the article. So, all I can do is really tell you that I'm really excited about that news and I am looking forward to it. And another thing that's very pertinent to me, doesn't mean a lot to the rest of you. I just think it's a fun thing that independent bookstores in my area are doing. There is a Bookstores Under the Big Sky Montana Bookstore Trail Passport. Independent bookstores across Montana are participating, and basically you can travel around the state and visit those bookstores. And when you do, you can get a stamp. Here is the map. If you know me, you know I love anything with a map. So real fun. The one that's going to be really difficult is that one. Page Turners in Fairview. So you can see that is basically on the border with, I'm assuming that's North Dakota. It's North Dakota. I'm bad at geography, but I'm not that bad. And something I've learned since I moved to Montana, people don't realize how big the state is. That's actually one of Joel's struggles. His region for his company is Montana, and people are like, oh, you should be in Billings like all the time. Well, we live in Missoula, which is here. Billings is here. That's a 6.5 hour, 7 depending on weather and traffic, hour drive away from us. So that's about a 6 or a 7 hour drive. This store at the end is like a 10-hour drive, and it's even far from Billings. So that one will be difficult. It's the only one way out there, but we are going to try to visit as many of these stores as we would like. It'll be easy-ish for Joel since he does have to travel around the state a fair amount. He's actually on his way home right now. But we did hit one store over the weekend, last Saturday, Chapter 1 in Hamilton. This one right there. Of course, I got a t-shirt. I love a t-shirt. And actually, I really do appreciate Chapter 1 because they are a very inclusive, diverse, and independent bookstore in a very conservative small town outside of Missoula. And they have rainbow flags in the window. They have sections about social justice in the store and things like that. So I really appreciate them a great deal, and I was happy to go and buy a store. And I love what they do. So you can see here is a sample of the pages. That's Corner Bookstore. That is actually the bookstore that Joel and I were at for the drag show Story Hour recently. Sorry, not the Corner Bookstore, Country Bookshelf. This one is the one that we were there. So there's a stamp where they can mark that you have been there, and that's Corner Bookstore. Of course, Montana Book Company is participating. There they are. Haven't been there yet, but I will be because I love that store. I just think this is a really fun thing to do. And I believe when you finish at the end of summer or at the end of the trail, scan the QR code and enter the drawing to win. I just think that's a really fun thing that they're doing. So I thought I would quickly talk about that. Let's get into the actual Friday Reads portion of the video. And before we do that, I should mention Jamie is doing great. She's actually lying down here and staring at me because she wants a walk. It's late in the day for me to be filming a Friday Reads. But Joel is still on his way home, and today ended up being sort of crazy for various reasons. Actually, and that, you know what, there is that last thing. So Jamie's doing well. One thing I'll mention, like a fun thing before we get to the sad thing. So as her hair grows in from the radiation treatment she had for a nasal tumor, she has a mustache. I'll put a photo here. It's really cute as it grows in. She pulls it off very well. And during Pride Month, that is making my heart happy. The hard thing. So I guess it makes sense that I almost kind of glossed over it in my mind. I've mentioned a couple of times that I don't really know what I'm going to be up for in terms of reading and how this month is going to go for me. And I feel like it's kind of reached the point where I should just mention it because we're hitting the point where it's getting difficult. If you follow along, you know, last June we lost a dog, Guinness, to a brain tumor, and the anniversary is coming up. And the only reason I mention that is that it is something that has been very hard. I knew it was going to be hard, and the closer it gets, the harder it is. And even today I got, I'm going to try not to get emotional, but, I got very emotional earlier today because, you know, you get those emails about, photos that were taken on this day in the past. I got one of those emails this morning, and one of the photos was something I had taken exactly a year ago. I'll put it here. And it was the last time that Guinness and I got to sit outside in the sun during my lunch break and have a nice little peaceful together time. The serious decline started not long after that, and we lost him 10 days later. So that's going to be very hard. And next weekend is going to be really hard. And to the point where I don't really want to promise that there's going to be a Friday Reads. If I can do it, maybe it'll be a distraction. I'm going to say that. It might provide a necessary distraction, which could be very needed. But there's a chance I won't do a Friday Reads next week because I don't know what I'm feeling. And, you know, mental health is mental health. And I know this is a sort of unpleasant topic, but it's where I'm at mentally and emotionally. And I think it's also important to be honest with those things and, you know, talk about when you're having a hard time. Mental health is really important, really important. And that's mine right now. So the reason next week is difficult is that Saturday is Missoula Pride. There is a parade. Sunday is Father's Day. And then Monday is June 19th. And one of the last things we got to do with Guinness before the serious decline was take him to the Missoula Pride parade. So it's gotten wrapped up in my head, like emotionally, with everything else. And then we lost him on Father's Day, which is not June 19th this year. And unfortunately, it means that these big three complex emotional things are all happening across 3 consecutive days, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. So that's going to be a lot. And, you know, I don't want to linger on it, but it's going to be a lot. And I appreciate the support I've gotten from everyone here over the last year as we've dealt with all of the grief and managed Jamie's grief and then Jamie's own health issues that have come up. It's very nice and appreciated from everyone. So, you know, I don't want to linger on it. Let's get to the actual Friday Reads portion of this video and talk about the 5 books that I managed to finish. The first one is A Room with a View by E.M. Forster. I think mostly done. I think I had maybe like 100 pages left when I mentioned this in my last Friday Reads video. I kind of tore through them over last weekend, and I love this book. I read it for the first time in 2011. I'm trying to decide what I'm going to do because I'm going to be... Well, I've already read some E.M. Forster books for the E.M. Forster read-along, which will be linked down below. But I am going to be reading some more that have also been favorites of mine. And I'm trying to decide how to include these in my best of the year. I'm thinking I might have a separate list for rereads and then have the main list just be things I read for the first time this year. I don't know. I just think it's going to be very difficult to place a bunch of different E.M. Forster books on a list. So maybe it's a cop-out, but it's just going to make it easier for me. So I loved this book. I also watched the movie of it last night as I'm filming this. I'm filming this on Friday, and I watched it Thursday night. It's so good. It's so good. It's a really great adaptation. I would love to do a video about a book-to-movie comparison, but I don't think there's a whole lot that's interesting to talk about because pretty much it's a faithful adaptation. There are only a couple of little changes. There's only one really significant change, I think. And the rest is just that some stuff was condensed for time, but I feel like the book can still the movie still alludes to things. Like one thing is the movie glosses over a lot of the politics that happen in the pension that they are all staying at in Florence in the beginning of the book. However, I think the movie does kind of nod to the existence of those. It's just not really including them, which I think makes it a really smart adaptation. If you're unfamiliar, this is the story of Lucy Honeychurch, who's played by Helena Bonham Carter, to just flawless in the movie. So she begins the book in Florence with her cousin, who's older than her, and played by Maggie Smith, to cranky older lady perfection. And in Florence, she meets the Emersons, who are a father and a son, and they are very unconventional. The father has sort of an honesty problem, I guess you would call it. He calls things like he sees it. He likes to be a genuine and kind person, and society doesn't always approve those. So like the title immediately comes in because Lucy and her cousin were supposed to have a room with a view. And they get there and they don't have it. And they're commenting on this at dinner. And the father jumps in and says, well, we have rooms with a view. Why don't you trade rooms with us? And this is frowned upon because society and norms and all that stuff. So E.M. Forster is really kind of pointedly getting at a lot of that stuff. But also Lucy is at a very crucial age. A long time ago, someone had asked me for examples of what I would say are great early adulthood novels about people figuring out what kind of a person they're going to be. And this is a flawless example of that because she is at an age where she can either choose to go along with what society expects her, or she can kind of break the mold and go with what her passions say. And that's what the book is about. She ends up back in London, and it's glorious. I love this book a lot. I'm really glad I did this reread and that I watched the movie. And yeah, it's perfect. It's a perfect book. I love it. The next thing that I read was something I knew would be really quick. It was on my Pride Month pile of possibilities. I'll link that down below as well, because all of these have come from that. It is a library book that I have, Different for Boys by Patrick Ness. This is interesting. It's like 95 pages, and a lot of it is pretty heavily illustrated. So there are, it's like 95 pages, but there are a lot of pages that are illustrations or just illustrated. It is also a book that has censoring, and it's trying to use the censoring to talk about how sort of silly and arbitrary it is to censor conversation about things young people do that older people like to pretend that they don't do, or especially if they are a young man who is doing these things with other young men. And there's sort of a meta commentary because the characters in this story can see the censoring as it happens. So it's supposed to be sort of like a meta commentary about what is silenced and what is not. It doesn't quite work for me. It's clever, but it's a good book. I wouldn't say it's a great book. And it's very short. I think it's trying to a little too hard to be clever. But it only wasted like maybe an hour of my time. So I could never really complain about that. I'm glad I read it. It was interesting, but I definitely did not love it. Next, I did an audio, and I did Fire Island, Love, Loss, and Liberation in an American Paradise by Jack Parlett. I am, of course, putting up the UK paperback cover because I have to censor it, but still, it's so much better than the American cover, which is just sad. I was really looking forward to this. It's nonfiction. And actually, I will say, spoiler, I I'm proud of the reading I did this past week, not just because I managed to finish 5 books, but because it's pretty diverse. It could be better, but it's, I have a classic queer book. I have a sort of young adult graphic novel. I have a history book. I have indigenous queer representation coming up. I have non-binary representation coming up. I'm pleased with that. So June is shaping up to be very successful in regard to that. I have a couple of other things I really want to hit before I can call it diverse. Well, I mean, it's diverse, but I want it to be better. I want there to be representation for a lot of other groups as well. So anyway, back to Fire Island. I was really looking forward to this because it's sort of a history of the island and also about Jack Parlett's experience coming to Fire Island for the first time and how he became interested in it as a topic, and also about the people who come to Fire Island, the famous people like Tennessee Williams and Frank O'Hara and people like that who have come to the island and made it the place that it was. And I liked it. I didn't love it in the end. I thought it spent more time on the people than it did on the place. And it did grapple with some of the more complicated things about Fire Island. It spent a lot of time, for instance, on James Baldwin and how his experience coming to Fire Island as a black gay man was very different than the experience of all the white gay men who came, and how they were sort of welcomed into society and he was sort of pushed to the fringe of it. And it does spend a lot of time talking about that, but and maybe this is my attitude as a New Yorker who has never been to gay Fire Island, and part of that is because of access. At least today, and this has been the case for a long time, Fire Island is a place where very wealthy gay people go. And there's a lot of access. There's a lot of closed-mindedness about other people. And I don't really have the patience for that. So I've never been. It's also very geographically difficult to get to. If you live in New York City, you have to take like a train out and then you have to catch a ferry over. So it's sort of inaccessible. And it just, over time especially, has lent itself to the idea that people of privilege get to go to Fire Island. And the book does grapple with that, but maybe for me at least, with my baggage about it, it didn't go in hard enough. And sometimes it felt a little odd because it moves chronologically through time, but then occasionally it will break form and jump to Jack Parlett's present on the island. And I don't think it's always that successful, but it's a very interesting book. I would still recommend it. I think some of my problems had to do with me and my expectations and what I would like a book about Fire Island to really reckon with. And it didn't necessarily do that. And that's fine, but it meant that it wasn't that satisfying for me, if that makes sense at all. So I finished that on audio, and then I started 2 books, and one of them took a little longer than I had anticipated, but one of them was really quick, and that was Alice Austen Lived Here by Alex Gino. This is just a delight of a book. It is middle grade, but I really loved it. I don't care that it's middle grade. I think it's fantastic, and I hope that if you read it, you would think the same thing. Basically, it follows 2 non-binary middle schoolers as they work on a project for their history class. They live on Staten Island. And this is actually another place where my New Yorker baggage comes into play, because historically, New Yorkers sneer at Staten Island. It's the very unloved borough. People frequently forget that it exists. We make fun of people who are from there and all that kind. It is changing. And I do appreciate that this is a book that is sort of challenging me to think differently about that, because it's hard to break out of those things when you grow up with them and they are so ingrained in you. And, one of the explanations for it, I think, is that through no fault of its own, when a lot of improvements were being done to New York City, like highways and bridges were being built in the 40s and 50s, Staten Island was designated to be the dump for those. So Staten Island was literally a garbage dump for a long time. And it is not anymore. And there have been a lot of attempts to do different things with that land. It's been complicated because I believe the dump was already closed by the time 9/11 happened. But when 9/11 happened and there was all that wreckage from Ground Zero, a lot of it ended up in the old dump. And because of that, there are issues and legal disputes over how to treat that land, because it is also the final resting place for a lot of bodies and remains that were not identified. It's a very unhappy thing. But anyway, I'm glad that this book really kind of challenged me as a New Yorker to help get rid of the stigma of Staten Island, because I do need to do that. I frequently will like joke to Joel, like Staten Island will come up and I'll be, that's not a place. And that's my own thing that I need to get over. But anyway, so they live on Staten Island. There is a project from the Historical Museum where history classes are asking kids to recommend a historical figure from Staten Island who, or related to Staten Island at least, who should get a statue in front of the Borough Hall, I think it was. And the two protagonists, who are non-binary again, decide that they're sort of tired of statues going to white men in history, and they want to find someone who is female or queer, and they find someone who is both. Alice Austen. And one of the things that's really interesting about the book is that Alice Austen is a real person. She was a photographer who lived on Staten Island her whole life. And basically, she was a photographer. She didn't identify as a lesbian, but I think it's pretty safe to say that she was, because she lived with a woman. She kind of embraced a queer identity and was unapologetic about it. It's just that language that she had access to at the time, discrimination of the time probably would have gotten in the way of her using the term lesbian to identify who she was and how she lived her life. But it's safe to assume that she was. So that is the focus of their project, and it's about them getting to know queer history, and it's about the forming of queer communities and getting to know our own history, which I think is really important. It's a great message for middle schoolers and for adults. Again, this is a book that's teaching me something about Staten Island that I need to get over in my life, and I deeply appreciate that. It's also just a really sweet book, just like Melissa, just like Rick, and it is wholesome in a way. It was very much something that I needed right now, because it was so sweet and cute and all of that stuff. So I would really highly recommend Alice Austen Lived Here, especially if you have read Melissa, because Melissa is one of the most challenged books in the country. Unfortunately, it's because it's such a cute book. It's about acceptance and love, and that's basically what this book is as well. I really liked it. The final book that I finished in this past week was A Minor Chorus by Billy Ray Belcourt. This I had decided to pick up before I jump into Stone Butch Blues, because last weekend when I finished A Room with a View, I was kind of thinking to myself, do I want to jump right into Stone Butch Blues, or do I want to jump into this short book that I could probably be done with by Wednesday and then go to Stone Butch Blues? I ended up not finishing this as quickly as I thought I would, even though it's only 159 pages, I believe. Yes, 159 pages. And part of that has to do with what the book is. So it's a very meta book. It seems to follow, I don't want to assume this is the case because I haven't researched it. I finished this like 2 hours ago. But the protagonist seems to kind of dovetail with Billy Ray Belcourt. I'm not saying it is him, but it seems like there are correlations. And basically, it's an Indigenous queer man in Alberta who decides to temporarily leave his PhD program or his graduate school program in order to think about writing a novel. And then he kind of interviews people who have been in his life over the course of the novella to help him frame what he wants this novel to be, what he wants it to represent. He doesn't really know. And it's sort of a meta discussion. And for me, I think the meta part didn't work. I think ultimately some of the things that didn't vibe with me kind of work because this character is overly aggressively intellectual, and he's very concerned with, like, at one point he comes up with this great observation about what writing is like, and he tweets it, and then it, like, immediately comments on how many likes it got over the first hour, which is something people do. It's fine. So it just gives you the idea that he's aggressively intellectual, but so is the book is aggressively intellectual, but so is the character. So it's coming from him is what I'm trying to say. And at one point early on, I didn't mark down the place, but he even makes notes about what, here we go. He kind of comments on what a novel can do and why a novel could potentially be more important than his work as a graduate student. I hesitated. I still want to write, I said. I've been trained to see the novel as this capacious and possibly dissident form for the articulation of social life. I've been thinking, what if I wrote one myself? I'd reach a larger audience. I could represent the lives of queer and Cree people without the constraints of scholarly norms. I could write a book about northern Alberta. There's so much to be said about what it is to be in a place that history has so thoroughly shaped. My writing is so embodied, so full of longing, I tend toward the poetic all the time. There's a kind of music I'm trying to generate, I think. What if I've been working in the wrong mode this entire time? I was ad-libbing, but I was abuzz with the euphoria of something that felt like political transformation. I was like a character in Virginia Woolf. There must be another life. So that kind of gives you the sense of what this novel is, because that is pretty much the entire novel. It's a sort of meta-commentary on writing a novel, and the conversations that he has with other people are basically treated as, there's almost something self-important about them, which I do think also ties back to the character and what he needs, the validation he needs and all of that, because it's like he's announcing to all of the people in his life, I'm going to write a novel and I'm going to be good at it. It's going to represent all of this, and this, and, it's sort of like announcing his own importance to people, which I appreciate. I didn't necessarily enjoy, and that's why it took me longer to get through this than I think it otherwise might have, especially given how small it is. It's only small. You could dunk this in your coffee. Don't know why you would, but you could. But I'm glad I read it, and again, I love that it has so much Indigenous queer representation, and that it really grapples with the sense of loss and the ways in which, one thing that really can tick me off is when, this is true of Montana, you can see this happen a lot. Like, people will point to reservation areas in this state and refer to them as, in very derogatory terms, because they are not nice towns. They're very economically depressed. But people have a tendency to blame that on the town. They blame that on the people, as if we didn't create the circumstances that led to that. Just saying. And this is a book that grapples with that from a queer perspective, which I did like a lot. So that was A Minor Chorus, a novel by Billy Ray Belcourt. I have not decided what my next audiobook is going to be. I think I might need something a little cute. I'm pulling up my Pride TBR. I don't know. I think I might do Let's Talk About Love by Claire Can, get some asexual representation into my Pride Month and see how that goes. But I don't know. I haven't decided yet, so we'll see. And then I am going to try to pick up Stone Butch Blues over the weekend and get started on this, because this is the book for the Queer TBR tackle. Information about that will be down below as well. So that's a lot in only 28 minutes. But that's what's going on in life, in reading, in everything, for better or for worse. And, I don't think it would suit anyone for me to pretend that some of the sad things aren't happening or out there or real. So there you go. That's my Friday reads for this week. I'm glad I got all of these done. If nothing else, even if my reading just stops at this point in the month of June, I've got 5 books, 5 good books overall, even though I have some personal quibbles with some of them. They are all good books, and I would recommend them to you. So I'd love to hear what you've had going on this past week, what you've been watching, reading, loving, all of that in the comment section down below. And as always, I appreciate your time. And again, I appreciate your support during some emotionally difficult times that we have been through over the last year. And it means a lot. Anyway, I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.